Best ever listeners, welcome to the Best Ever CRE podcast. I am your host, Joe Cornwell, and today I am joined by Nick Stageberg. Nick is the owner of Black Swan Real Estate. They're based in Rochester, Minnesota. They are a vertically integrated real estate operation. They have over 1,700 doors and $400 million in assets under management. He is a returning guest to the Best Ever podcast. So, Nick, welcome back. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Always a pleasure to get the privilege to be on the show here.
We appreciate you returning. I know you said it's been about 6 months since you were on the show. So if you did not catch that episode with Nick, check that out. It aired last December or so. But today we're going to talk about what have you been working on the last 6 months. And then obviously we'll get a little bit into, some of your other background and lessons learned along the way.
Yeah. So the last 6 months have been extraordinarily busy. We bought almost nothing in 2023 to 2024 timeframe. Then 2024 was the best acquisitions year in the history of the company. It's been a tough season for a lot of people in our business. Fortunately, we're doing pretty well. We got a lot of fixed rate debt, and overall, our projects are doing pretty well despite kind of the current interest rate cap rate environment. So there's not a lot of buyers out there, and we're buying. 2024 was our best acquisitions year ever, and then 2025 is already shaping up to be our best acquisitions year ever. So it's been a busy time for us, a good kind of busy though.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And it's definitely a little different than what we're hearing from a lot of other investors out there, of all sizes, small, large, medium. It's tough to find deals, and it's certainly tough to find deals that make sense in today's economics. So before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about your background. How'd you get into real estate, and what did that look like for you?
Yeah, so I have a different background than most. I grew up in Section 8 housing in a very challenging environment. Never met my father. My mother had a traumatic brain injury when I was 6 years old, and I grew up being the man of the house. And I think I'm grateful for that background. It made me the man that I am today, the person who is still the man of the house or something like that. I had the privilege to somehow I'm a spiritual person. I think my path is guided. I ended up being able to go to a private university. I got a bachelor's degree in ministry and a bachelor's degree in computer science, and did a whole successful career in IT. Had a couple tech startups where we went from 0 to 100 million. Helped build a couple $100 million tech startup companies, and along the way, bought one house one year, a couple houses next year, 4 houses next year, kind of building a retirement portfolio, so to speak, and figuring out what to do with sort of those tech winnings. And eventually, this sort of just became the next startup. And so today we have over a third of $1 billion in assets under management. Seems kind of crazy to say that out loud. We've got 60 employees here in Rochester, and then quite a few folks over in Tacoma, Washington as well. And yeah, we're still a rapidly growing organization. I think we'll have $1 billion in assets under management in the not so distant future.
That's great. And it sounds like you just certainly had a lot of obstacles to overcome early in your life. And I can see how that certainly would shape you and has shaped you. So you talked about your market. So tell us a little bit about that. Where are you investing, and where's your portfolio predominantly today?
Our core market here is in Rochester, Minnesota. So that's home of the Mayo Clinic, which is it's a niche market. We believe in a blue ocean theory. So if you haven't checked that out. There's the notion of finding hot markets where there's lots of other investors, and those would be red oceans or oceans where there's lots of sharks. And if there's blood in the water, there's probably prey. There's something to eat. But blue ocean theory would say if you can find a market where there's not other sharks and you can dominate that market, you can be successful in that market. You're protected from competition, and most of the greatest success stories happen for individuals that they go all in on a particular niche that's almost always a blue ocean. So there's not a lot of big players in our market. It's not a huge market, and it's a market that is very unusual. So like the president might stop by and get a checkup one day, like you're driving to work, and all of a sudden, like the presidential motorcade just like cuts you off. They have like a barricade of rolling plow trucks, like 10-ton plow trucks and stuff like that, or maybe like a Saudi Arabian prince or something like that. And like some private helicopter motorcade flies by or something like that. But then it's also like a relatively normal Midwestern community. So it's a very unusual community. Mayo Clinic is currently working on the Hospital of the Future. So that's a $5 billion expansion to their campus here. So that's like twice the size of an Amazon HQ2. dropped into our MSA is only 250,000 people. So it's the largest per capita public-private partnership spend in the entire United States. So we really love this market, and we like Minnesota. It has more reserves of free fresh water than any other state in the country, is better positioned for climate change than any other state in the country. And if you look up pretty much any vital statistic ranking, like degree matriculation rate or median poverty or whatever, Minnesota is typically in the top 3 of almost every vital statistic ranking in that exists. So it's just a good, quiet state that consistently performs, has a solid workforce, just kind of clocks in, solid growth. It's not a sexy market. It's not in the Sun Belt, but it's done quite well for us.
Yeah, no, and I love that. I love your knowledge on the market. That's great, and obviously I can tell how much time, effort, and research you put into this, and I'm assuming that's a constant evolution, right? Always staying on top of ever changing macroeconomics of your market. But I also love the idea. I guess Minnesota would be considered Midwest. Obviously it's north of the north and Midwest, but it's the Midwest in general. The last 10 years or so, I've been following the real estate market, has not gotten much love. So I'm based in Cincinnati. So obviously I'm a big fan and proponent of the Midwest. That's where my portfolio exists and where our company operates. And it seems though this last year or so, I'm starting to see the tides turn. I'm seeing people start talking about the Midwest. It's starting to get a lot more love and attention, deservedly, because as you mentioned and alluded to, it doesn't have these big ebbs and flows that the Southeast has had, the Southwest has had, the coast have had, where yes, they might have these 10-20% run-ups in values and rents, but then they also come crashing down, as we saw in a big drop in 2008, a big drop in 2020, and then we've seen the last couple of years where they receded as well. So yeah, I think just philosophically, a lot of investors over the next 10 years are going to start investing in the Midwest just due to that safety. Especially some of the people who might have got burnt investing in deals in some of those,
100%.
Quote unquote sexier markets, as you put it. I like the way you put that.
Yep.
So, okay, all that in mind, let's talk a little bit more about your company. I know you mentioned to me you're vertically integrated. A lot of people are saying that's almost kind of like a buzzword these days, and I am as well. But so I certainly see and believe in the merits of it. But what does that mean to you, and why?
Yeah, I agree. I would dare say we were vertically integrated before it was cool. I know you turn back the clock to the late 2010s, and a lot of syndicators, fund managers would kind of look down their nose at someone that was not so sophisticated that they could successfully manage the manager, hire third-party management. I've seen asset managers that brag about how they never visit the assets that they acquire, that they hire a third-party due diligence firm to go check on every unit and the property condition. Right. And they have a well-diversified portfolio that's professionally managed. And maybe it's just the hardworking Midwesterner in me. But despite the size of our organization, I have personally walked almost every single unit we've ever acquired. I bring a big team with me. We're scoring every unit and all the stuff that maybe some of those professional due diligence firms do. But what those firms don't do is they don't look across the street and see that the community across the street doesn't look so nice, and maybe we're on the wrong side of the train tracks here. The Japanese have this concept of the gemba. So the worst thing like a Toyota executive could ever do is make a decision from a conference room, from a boardroom, like, how can we make the factory go faster? No, you'd go to the factory floor. The executives would go to the factory floor to have that discussion. And maybe the first thing they realize is, man, it's really noisy in here. It's hard to talk in here. We should try to make our factory equipment quieter. Can we put in some acoustic tiles? It's kind of hot in here. Can we improve the air conditioning? And lo and behold, when you make it quieter and you make it cooler, like, your factory goes faster. And when
people want to work. Yeah.
When you're removed from the site of your decision's impact, you make lower quality decisions. So we love being in the trenches. We have in-house property management, of course. That's the quarterback. But we have in-house lawn, snow, cleaning, the kind of things where typically, like, your asset manager hires a third-party manager, that manages the property, who probably is like a regional that hires a site manager, who then hires a third-party vended cleaner and a third-party vended lawn provider and a third-party vended snow provider. And at the end of the day, you end up with a lot of disconnects, a lot of disalignments of incentives. Like our on-staff snow people, they don't go out and clear snow unless it snows. In Minnesota, snow clearance is a very big deal. And they don't tear up our parking lots. Like, they know they need to take their time and be careful, because we own those parking lots. Whereas the vended, snow clearance providers, well, they're just going to go as fast as they can possibly go. And if they tear up your parking lot and you have to go redo it in the spring, well, that's not on them. So we take vertical integration very seriously, and we're always asking ourselves, how can we bring something in-house? How can we control things better? That's the biggest thing we like to have. How can we improve quality? How can we improve communication between our tenants and the basically the value that they receive, and then ultimately all those things radically reduce costs. So like our snow clearance bill for one of our assets, we have a large townhome community, and we paid like $6,000 for snow clearance on that community this past winter because it was a very mild winter, an exceptionally mild winter in Minnesota. Again, going back to our well positioned for climate change. We cut our snow clearance bill by like 80% this past year because if we hired a vendor, they would come out every excuse they can. They're desperate to keep their guys busy. Their in-house guys, like, we've got plenty of work for them to do. They don't need to go out and clear snow unless the snow really needs to be cleared.
I love that, man. There's so many good points in there. The snow. Obviously half of our listener base probably doesn't deal with snow or care about snow, maybe more, but the snow thing is such a racket. It can be, right? Like you talked about with third. We had this one company doing snow removal for us, property in Cincinnati in the metro. And I remember this guy sent me a picture. There was like a dusting of snow. I mean, it was like an eighth of an inch of snow.
Yes.
And he literally sends me a before and after picture. And I'm like, which one's which? Like, I don't even know, like, when was before and after, because it's literally snowing, as he's doing it too. And I'm literally like, yeah, like, you need, if it is such a light snow like this, like, you need to call before you go and treat, like, because of course they're going to send you a fat bill.
But there's a disalignment of incentives. Like, they need to stay busy,
exactly right.
100%.
Yeah, it's just like lawn service, right? If they could cut it, 3 times a week or whatever, they would, if they needed more, more lawns to cut. So, but back to this idea you're talking about, I picture a lot of things in spectrums, and so when you're describing this, I'm kind of visualizing this spectrum. And on the one side, you have people that you kind of alluded to, and I'm not going to name names, but there are certainly people that I know very well. There's a lot of people that are, come to Best Ever Conference. There's a lot of people that have been on the show where they're very far to this end of the spectrum, meaning the people that want nothing to do with the physical management or operation of an asset, right? There's a lot of different, things I could say about that. But to your point, it sounds like 5-10 years ago, when syndications and these things first started becoming popular, I think you made the point, people kind of look down on those further down the spectrum because it's like, well, if you were managing this correctly, you wouldn't have to be distracted by all these things that you alluded to, right? In the vertical integration, or if you just found the right people. The other end of that spectrum, I was probably more where I fall, and it sounds like maybe more where you fall, where it's, I have my hand in every single piece of my business. So, acquisitions, raising capital, closing on deals, executing deals, operations, construction, management, lease up, all that stuff, every phase. Now, we're a much smaller company. So I will say that when you think about this spectrum, at some point of scale, you as an owner, as an operator, as a partner in these businesses, of course, you have to continue to grow as a leader and step back. To that, I'll use Joe Fairless, right? Everybody knows Joe. He started the Best Ever brand. When he closed on his first syndication, he's told the story many times. He was out patching, potholes in the parking lot. Obviously we've seen where Joe and Ashcroft have gone over the last, 10, 12 years. It's like, clearly that's not what he should still be doing today. It's right, patching potholes in an asset parking lot. But my point is that everyone has to decide at some point along the journey where they want themselves as an owner to be and the company as a whole. And in my opinion, too many people are too far down that other spectrum of, I'm going to raise capital and close the deal and then move on to the next acquisition, and they're stuck in that one specific space of real estate, which, as we know, doesn't, I think buying the deal right is obviously vastly important, but everything after that is ultimately what's going to determine the outcome of the asset. So
absolutely. I've observed that operation everything. You can buy it for a great price, get great debt, but if you don't nail the operations, like, things can go downhill so fast. And conversely, you can pay too much, you can get terrible debt, you can all the things that people tend to focus on, on podcasts like these or at conferences and stuff like that. Like, if you aren't, saving every penny you can on snow removal or cleaning, if your maintenance tickets aren't delivering high customer satisfaction to your tenants and your renewal rates suck, like that is the thing that drives everything else. Everything else is window dressing compared to just operational excellence.
And that, so my question to you with that is, how does one decide where they want to fall in the spectrum? Like what was your approach when you laid out your company and your vision, to ultimately be on that other end of the spectrum that is heavily involved in every aspect of real estate operation?
So I had the good fortune to be a pretty successful and experienced entrepreneur before creating a real estate private equity firm. That's like a very sophisticated phrase or something like that. And there is a totally legitimate business model out there where you're a Wall Street persona, where you raise capital and then you like place capital with other operators and kind of turn the screws on them and turn the screws on the investors and try to extract as much carry and fees as you can. Like that is a legitimate business model, and those people have a place to occupy in the space. And I think a lot of people, that's what they want. They want to kind of get something for nothing or for as little work as they can or whatever. My focus as an entrepreneur, as a person who has grown companies that make products that do things, is my belief is if you create as much value as possible, if you create raving fans, the people that you serve, if you create raving fans, the world's going to pave a path to your door, and you will have more financial abundance in your life than you could ever possibly manage. And I've got 5 emails in my inbox right now of brokers that want to do deals with me. We've got $10 million on our wait list for our Secure Freedom Fund right now, and theoretically I could go raise that money and place that capital, but I want to wait until I do a really good deal where I know I can create massive value, and I know if I have the discipline to keep it tight and to only do deals where I know I can create massive value, I'm going to be very successful. And it's just it's a flywheel, a commitment to daily. Japanese would call it Kaizen, or continuous improvement. Lean manufacturing, agile programming. Like the techniques that we use in our operations are techniques that are commonplace in the technology industry, have been commonplace for decades. All we do is we just have this daily commitment to continuous improvement of our operations. I meet with my leadership team almost every day, and we go around the room and say, hey, like, what do we need to do to do a little bit better? Every Monday morning, 8 a.m., we have an all hands meeting, and we've got our key performance indicators. We have a safety culture. So the only thing you can get in trouble for is failing to report a problem. You can never get in trouble for reporting a problem. Like, where are people stuck? Where do people need help? Where do people need support? My primary key performance indicator, every employee needs to rate their happiness on a scale of 1 to 10 via an anonymous Google form. So how happy are they? How much energy do they have? And how valued do they feel in their work? I think if you just, the customer is not always right, and the customer certainly does not come first. If you pour into your team, if your team is motivated, if your team is passionate about their work and loves their work, which is sadly quite rare in the property management industry, then your customers are going to get taken care of. So that's my primary key performance indicator. And like a pro tip I would share with anybody here that's struggling with how to improve anything. So in the software world, or kind of in the project management world, you learn that you just need 2 metrics. You just need 2 metrics to understand any aspect of your business, and that's queue depth and queue velocity. So let's say you're building an assembly line for cars. You have a queue for putting a windshield on the car. You have a queue for putting an engine in the car, and then you have queue velocity. How many windshields did we put on that car in the last iteration? So let's say your iteration is 1 week. We meet every week as a team. And so let's say managing our maintenance tickets. So how many maintenance tickets are waiting? How many maintenance tickets did we close in the last week? Let's say we're acquiring properties. How much money is in our queue to raise from investors? How many acquisitions are in our queue to deploy that capital? And how much money did we raise? And how many properties did we get under contract or look at here in the last week? How many vacant units do we have that are in our queue right now to lease? How many leases were signed and paid last week? That's our queue velocity. So if you don't know your queue depth and your queue velocity for every aspect of your organization, you're frankly flying blind. And all you do is just every single week you come back to your leadership and you come back to your teams, to your frontline staff. I mean, I go hang out with our maintenance techs. I go buy them lunch. I hang out with our cleaners. What can we do to clean our units, do our turns just a little bit faster, to a little bit higher quality standard? I promise you, sometimes these people are in tears that the CEO of the company would sit down with them and just say, what can we do? Oh, you
Yeah.
sometimes this thing's loose. If we got you a little hex wrench and put that in our standard cleaning kit, would that make it where we don't have to file a maintenance ticket and that gets our turn, shaves $50 off our turn time, like that's what that looks like. That's the nuts and bolts work that goes with a commitment to operational excellence.
Yeah, I mean that's all brilliant advice. You've alluded a lot to the Japanese terminology. What's your like where are you I guess integrating that into your business or how?
Yeah. So coming from a technology background, these are agile methodology. If you go look up, the Agile Manifesto, you look up Scrum practices. There's lots of management methodologies that were used in the software field, the IT field for decades before they became more popular in other industries. So if you look like Traction, for example, Traction largely adopts a lot of agile practices. And a lot of those agile practices, those come from like lean manufacturing. You go all the way back to Deming and his work in Japanese manufacturing and stuff half a century ago, and you see that come to fruition. So Americans taught the Japanese these lean manufacturing principles, and then Japanese manufacturing crushed American manufacturing by actually embracing and leveraging them. An example of that is in the software development world for decades, there was a siloed staffing model. So you'd have a software engineer that you put on a particular project to go write this code. And then once they write the code, they maintain the code and they just kind of own that thing forever until that software engineer dies or quits or something like that. And then you have a new software engineer coming. And our industry, the software engineering industry, it did that for decades. And then eventually we woke up probably around circa year 2000 and said, wow, this is quite disastrous, because typically when that old software engineer retires or leaves and the new one comes in, there's this massive amount of chaos and churn and waste where we end up often like rewriting all the code because the new engineer doesn't really understand what the old engineer was doing. And that old engineer, maybe they were not following best practices and they weren't doing their job very well, or they weren't doing their job at all. They were literally, phoning it in. And we didn't notice because we had this siloed staffing model. And so the software engineering industry switched to a team-based model. So like, my last role in that career, I helped the Mayo Clinic build a software development insourcing group. We'd compete for software development contracts. I was managing 13 teams of engineers, and I had a rule that you could never, ever, ever have one engineer on one project. You'd have to have a team of engineers of at least 2 or 3 people, ideally like 4, 5, 6 people, and they manage a portfolio of projects. And that way, your engineers, they're kind of keeping an eye on each other. They're supporting each other. Let's say your system has an outage. It's not everything on one person's shoulders. Other people can step in to help with that outage and get that critical system back online. It may seem more expensive to have the overheads of communication and having multiple people on a project, but over the course of years of maintenance and management and continuous improvement, you get exponential gains in productivity, reliability, safety, continuity. So in the property management industry, it almost exclusively practices a siloed management model. And I'm sorry, but it is batshit crazy. So you typically have a site manager, you put on a site, we just closed on Boulder Ridge, for example. It's 112 townhomes. You'd put one site manager there. They often live on site. The tenants know where they live. They're knocking on their door 24 hours a day. They are the leasing agent. They manage escalations. They manage collections. Just everything is on their shoulders. And God help you if there's some sort of emergency. There's a natural disaster. There's a big water intrusion event. Now, everything else gets put aside so that they can manage that escalation, that disaster. And you don't send out a lease for a month because the site manager is busy with something else. And then you're really, in a world of hurt if that site manager leaves, which it's a very high turnover industry, unfortunately, because I think it has that siloed management model. So we don't do that. We pull back site staff. We eliminate the office and put in amenities like fitness centers or clubhouses or theater rooms. And then we have a team of leasing agents that lease all the units in the portfolio. We have a team that manages our escalations, that manages our collections, that manages. We have a team where they do emergency response. So when there's a water intrusion event, they've got fans, they've got dehumidifiers, they've got trucks, they've got every resource you could imagine because they're specialized in it. They're really good at it, and they don't get burned out because there's going to be fires, there's going to be floods, people are going to sue you, there's going to be deaths, there's going to be all sorts of problems. And if you don't have people that are specialized in that, we have people with like former law enforcement experience and stuff that specialize in that. All of these things seem kind of crazy in the property management industry, but those are like very common practices in the technology industry, which got a lot of those same practices from lean manufacturing that came from a lot of Japanese manufacturing models.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And the reason why I was asking is I had a professor in college who, prior to being a professor, was the head of HR rep for Mitsubishi's car factory here. And it was like in, I think, like Mason or Kings of Southwest Ohio. So he went from being like their kind of head of HR, but he in his teachings, almost every lesson he would have some sort of Japanese ideology that he would explain and how it applies to what we're practicing and learning and all these things. And and again, it was like an HR class for him, but it was just very interesting that's the second time in my life I've had somebody kind of repeatedly throw these kind of definitions out and how they apply to what you're doing. And so it was giving me some flashbacks there. Okay, so that is all great. I like the way you've really invested into this vertical integration. Again, it sounds like you're at the far end of that spectrum where you guys really have your hands in every single piece of your business, and obviously it's worked out really well for you. Um, Looking back at your progress and the way you've grown your portfolio and your business, at what point would you suggest somebody out there who's maybe building their own real estate portfolio? At what point does it start to make sense to grab onto more of these pieces of the vertical integration?
That's going to be different for every individual and what their background is. So the worst thing that I ever see investors do is they say that real estate is a passive investment. So if you're like an LP in a deal, it's pretty passive. You should still be checking in. There should still be a few minutes a year or something you're spending on that. But when you have a general partner or an operator that says, "Oh yeah, real estate's a passive investment," especially multifamily. Multifamily is a very high contact sport. I would say it has far more in common with like running a lemonade stand than it does with owning like a triple net commercial building, as an example.
Yeah.
That's when really disastrous things happen. So at a minimum, if you're going to be like running a deal, you should be running that deal. Even if you're managing the manager or whatever, you need to be actively engaged. And if you're not doing at least a 1 hour weekly call with the manager or something like that, I believe that you're negligent in your duties as an operator for that asset. And then it really depends on your background. So let's say, for example, you come from like a construction background, and one of our partners, they've done over $100 million of multifamily remodel work. They are a deep expert in that skill set. Well, we're going to go ahead and bring that in house. In fact, they own real estate because they made so many other people so much money remodeling multifamily properties. They're like, well, shoot, I should be participating in this equity upside. Let's say you have a background as like a lender. You're a commercial lender. Well, you should probably be pretty involved in obtaining new debt and renewing existing debt and relations and negotiations with lenders and stuff like that. Let's say you're an attorney. Well, you have a huge amount of skill sets you could bring, with like the asset management stuff, but also with escalations. So people don't spend enough time focusing on this, but every community is going to have a certain number of escalations every year. Legal escalations, people threatening lawsuits, especially in the Chat GPT era. A lot of people have become a lot more legally sophisticated all of a sudden. People will die. There's going to be things that happen, and if you're an attorney, you can probably save your operation tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars a year by just stepping in with the kind of skills and expertise that you have. Fortunately, I had a background as a manager, so I have that bachelor's degree in computer science, bachelor's degree in ministry, and so I kind of had this like hard skill of software engineering and stuff, and then a really powerful kind of soft skill toolkit for loving and serving and ultimately leading people. And so when my I don't know, love language, like I was at a property today, we've probably got 30 people there today working. We call it a full court press right after we buy a deal. And I love being in that busy beehive and making sure that everyone feels supported, everyone's on track, everyone knows what it is that they need to do. I grew up in a very chaotic situation. And so my emotional home is kind of one of chaos and bringing order to chaos. So I love to thrust myself into chaotic places. I figured out if I don't do that, I will sometimes instigate chaos in unhealthy ways. So like it's a therapeutic thing for me to do that. So that's my strength. That's my love language. And that's what I do. But it's going to be a different thing for each individual person. But the worst thing you can do is call it a passive investment when it's not. You need to be engaged. You need to be involved. You need to be honest with yourself. If you want a passive investment, you should go be an LP. I think a lot of LPs dream of being a GP, not realizing how insanely hard and demanding it is. It's a 24-hour a day job. The pay per hour is pretty good, but your return on hassle, your return on stress is sometimes not so great. So those would be maybe a few words I would share it, and it just depends on every single person, what their background, where they're at. When you have 100 units that you manage, that's going to be a completely different situation than if you have 1,000.
Yeah.
You can't bring lawn and snow and stuff in house until you have enough units to amortize. I mean, we own like tractors and power brooms and plow trucks and all sorts of pieces of equipment. Probably $1 million of equipment for our sites, and you can't do that until you have enough units to amortize that cost burden over. So it really just is going to depend a lot for each individual person.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. All right, let's transition into our good deal, bad deal segment. Would you like to do the good or the bad first?
Let me think here. Let's do the bad one first, right? So, what is it?
All right, go ahead.
Good news can wait. Bad news travels around the world before you get your pants on, or some marketing quote like that.
Yeah,
sure,
makes sense. Okay, so yeah, give us just kind of some high level overview. What is it? Asset type? What market? What'd you buy it for? And then how did it unfold?
Sure. So probably the most challenging deal in our portfolio right now is an asset called Tenaraville Apartments in Tacoma, Washington. We bought it. It was one of the last assets that we bought before interest rates really started running up. So we bought this in Q3 2022, and I think a lot of listeners will just wince just hearing that by itself, right? And just the market shifted in a radical way. I think anybody that closed on a deal in that time frame, they're probably having a tough time with that deal. But we bought quite a few deals around that time. This one is struggling. This is kind of the only one of that crop that's really struggling, and it was kind of a double whammy. So this was 120 units in Tacoma, Washington, in just a phenomenal location. So Class A location with $1 million homes next door and stuff. Is unrenovated, classic 1970 garden style workforce housing. Had been made a retirement community. There's no covenants or anything on that, but it's our attrition rate, our mortality attrition rate there is staggering. A lot of people pass away in that community because there's so many old people living in that community. We did a deep value add business plan, just like we do on most of the assets that we purchase. And we did a full court prep.
Define that for us. What do you guys define as a deep value add?
That's a great question, because I think a lot of groups, they'll say, "Oh yeah, we did a deep value add. We refinished the countertops, we refinished the tubs and tile surrounds. We splashed Dakota paint on everything." So for us,
that's why I asked, because my definition, coming from a construction background, is very different than most people's. That's why I ask.
Yeah, so we do a gut to the studs remodel. We retrofit washer dryers into the units. We rip out all the cabinets, counters, everything. We're putting in new PEX plumbing, because if you've ever owned one of these 1970s deals, you know that you have a lot of plumbing issues. And we have a different business model where we think if we can truly redevelop that asset, we have a BRRRR business model. We don't sell our assets, so we hope 20 years from now we're getting a huge dividend on that deep value add work that we do. And then if we ever did need to sell it, we're confident we can find a buyer that will recognize that extraordinary deep value add work that we do to our assets. So in this case, City of Tacoma decided to get very particular about permits and stuff like that during this time. And this is a thing that we're seeing all over the country. We're seeing rent control come into place. We're seeing municipalities tighten up zoning and permitting. It's become extraordinarily difficult to do business. I mean, Dallas banned Airbnbs. When Dallas bans Airbnbs, like no location is safe, so to speak, from kind of government really ratcheting up their level of oversight and intervention. And I don't pretend to understand all the factors involved in it, but it's made operations extraordinarily difficult to the point where we've had to reel back in a lot of our business plans. And Tenara kind of got the worst of it. So we had like 50 guys. So we vacated 40 some units out of the 120. So we vacated, more than a quarter of the property. We had everybody mobilized. So we had 40 guys there swinging hammers, and most people, when they renovate, they kind of do like onesie twosie renovations. We have the person running everything is a licensed general contractor. Like they run it like a new construction job site, like building a new apartment building, not like renovating existing apartment buildings. So there's huge economies of scale. Your quality goes way up when you have like a guy that's doing nothing but installing granite countertops over and over and over again. And the city stepped in like right as we got spooled up to peak, chaos, velocity. and said, whoa, way too much is going. It gave us a stop work order. Just did everything they could to really sideline us. I don't pretend to understand why. I don't think there was even any malice behind it. I think, and we were pulling permits. We were pulling electrical and plumbing permits. We had building permits and everything, but they just got to some level of there's too much going on here. We think that there needs to be a higher level of review going on. So they required us to pull in an architect, pull in a civil engineer to upsize our water main. Like I've
Yeah.
never seen that before.
Yeah.
And get civil engineering plans to document, non-permeable surface coverage and stuff like that. And really this whole thing tied us up for like a year. I mean, it was just
Yeah.
it was eviscerating the amount of loss, and we're not collecting rent during that time. The place
Sure.
looks like a disaster, so we can't lease new units. To give you some idea of the ridiculousness, so I mean, eventually they were like, well, you've got popcorn ceilings here, so you probably have asbestos here, right? And we're like, yeah, and along with everything else built in 1970. Like, well, you need the guys with the zero pressure systems to come in and scrape every single popcorn. I mean, it was crazy. They wouldn't let us permit resurfacing our parking, which is again just crazy. But they're like, oh, you don't think there's enough permeable surfaces here to control rainwater. So eventually, what we did is we put down like class 5 gravel, and then we stapled burlap straps to the ground because you're not allowed to put in asphalt and you can't stripe it. Those two things are prohibited. But because it was a job site that was in limbo, we could have a class 5 down, like where you put a job site trailer. I mean, we're like talking to attorneys, figuring out clever ways, like what can we do to create value here that's not going to like make the city even more angry. And
Yeah.
after years, I mean, it took 2 years to really get this thing into a place that the city was calm or happy with it. And we weren't the only ones that were hit with this. But it cost us millions of dollars. I mean, it was just,
Oh,
I
yeah.
was flying out to like walk all the vacants. I was just doing everything I could, but really it didn't help because now it's just some outsider coming in that doesn't have a relationship with the local inspector and authorities and stuff.
Yep.
So things are finally on track today, and we're renovating like I think we're delivering 6 units a month right now. So it's a pretty extreme velocity for delivering our renovated product. But it took us years to get here, and just cost so much time and money. Our construction loan is ticking. We had a mini perm, so we were at variable interest rate on it that would convert to permanent financing, and then
Yep.
struggled to make that permanent financing covenant because we had that stop work order. We had to get new financing that was like a mild but not easy cash in refi. So it was a litany of problems. All in all, I would say we're probably about 30 million into the project, and it's probably worth at least 30 million today. I think there's a clear path to 36 to 40 million in valuation without that much more construction spend, because it's really just kind of cleaning things up, finishing things up. All the really expensive stuff is mostly complete. So I think there is like a path to a good future for this project. But man, oh man, it has been a knockdown, drag out battle for years on that particular project.
Yeah, I've had a couple of those permit nightmares, obviously on much smaller deals, luckily. But yeah, I've been through the 1 year, 2 year type projects because of permitting issues, and it is a nightmare to say the least. But yeah, I guess my question that comes to mind is, what was your initial like hold time? What was your business plan, and how has that changed? In the last 2-3 years.
So we had to change our renovation plan to include things like scraping, asbestos ceilings and things of that nature. Our costs, went just way up across the board. Ultimately, we scaled back our scope of work in various places. So we were thinking we were going to renovate most, but not all the units. Like, we're very opportunistic about it. When we buy a property, we sit down at the kitchen table with the tenants and say, "Hey, we're going to do some huge renovations. Rents are going to go up. Is that something that you're excited about? Is that something that you're fearful about? Do you want to be one of the first people to move into those renovated units? You can help pick out the paint colors. Like, do you want to be a block captain, a champion of this for the other tenants in the community? Or are you on a fixed income?" And we will do everything we can to make sure that yours is the last unit that gets renovated, and we'll have incremental rent escalations. You have to do like 5% annual rent escalations or something like that. So it's coming, and 5 years from now, your rent's going to be 25% higher, and your unit won't be renovated. But that gets us, kind of close to our business plan, and hopefully keeps you in place for many years to come in a predictable way.
Mm.
So we work with people, and we don't typically renovate every single unit because there's a cohort that tends to stay in place in an unrenovated unit. So we're renovating fewer units. We're keeping, we walked every single unit and said, okay, This unit got kind of a heavy turn a few years before we bought it. It's in pretty good shape. We can probably get a pretty good premium for it if we make a few more incremental improvements to it. But this is a unit where it does not necessarily make sense for us to do a gut to the studs, remodel. We do some pretty extreme landscaping. So this particular community had a huge, campus that was just grass. It was a very unappealing campus, and we planned on putting in pickleball courts and pergolas and all kinds of just bring in these 5-foot diameter boulders and huge landscaping, and we dialed that budget back considerably. So we went heavy on the interior courtyard, but then the exterior perimeters where people the sight lines aren't focused and stuff. We did some very basic landscaping in those areas, which was challenging. At one point, we had a 30-foot tall pile of dirt, I think for a year, that the city would not let us move. And it started growing things. And then they were mad at us that we weren't mowing it. And we're like, you won't let us move it, and it's not mowable. So we had to decide, we had to go transport that soil offsite and stuff like that. So there were so many tactical considerations like that ended up driving a lot of our business plan, our renovation plan. And so overall, I think, our finish schedule didn't change that much. Our total number of units didn't actually change that much. We just became way more opportunistic and strategic about which units we were doing those full renovations on. And overall, things are relatively on track. We got sidelined for years in a very expensive way.
Okay, we're running up on time, but I do want to get to your good deal. But before that, to tell me a little bit about that block captain. What does that mean? How are you utilizing that? Because that's something I have not heard.
Yeah, so when we buy communities, we just purchased a community here in Rochester called Meadow Park Apartments, and as I said, I grew up in very adverse conditions, and this is a very mission-driven thing for me. I'm a very spiritual person. I'm a man of faith, and I am so grateful that I've enjoyed the success that I've enjoyed. I think I'm just incredibly blessed, and we try our best to share that, to pay that forward, and to kind of offer a hand back. So Meadow Park Apartments here in Rochester. I mean, there was a murder on site. A person was beaten to death a few days before we closed on the purchase, and it was a really just a rough community. And in those communities, inevitably, there's some people that might need to go to jail. They can't be there, and they probably need to be somewhere where society is protected from them. Very few of those people, though, really. There's usually just a couple of troublemakers in that community, and and then it has a huge adverse impact on the culture of the community. And you can usually find out in seconds who those individuals are. So in Meadow Park, it's 90 units, and there's 2 of those people, and we've got police there, and we're aggressively intervening. Then there's the opposite end of the spectrum, where there's usually some people, and I feel like a lot of property managers don't know how to use these people. Sometimes they're lampooned as like a Karen, or someone who's very bothersome and waste your time with leasing office. No, these people, they're your best friends. They're going to tell you everything that is negatively impacting the culture of your community. They're going to be very nosy. They're going to know exactly what's going on, whether you tell them or not. So you might as well be very transparent with them. They're going to be vocal towards you, towards other tenants. And if you can recruit and enroll these people in your vision and help them see that renovated product, they are going to do more to advance your business plan than anything you could possibly do. That's all there is to it. They're not site supers. We don't compensate them in any way, shape, or form. Usually, they just love being involved. They very rarely work. They're typically retired or disabled, or some they're a stay-at-home parent or something of that nature. But if you can make these people your champions, your task is going to be so much easier. They are your full-time security staff. They are everything. And if you don't get them on your side, you're in for a world of hurt. Those are the people that call the municipality and make up nonsense and try and get you in trouble or something like that. So you really need to get those block captains on your side. And if you don't, and if you don't know who they are, you're in trouble that way too. So.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that a lot. Okay, so give us the breakdown on that 112 unit deal before we jump off here.
Yeah, so Apple Valley, Minnesota. It's about an hour north of Rochester, and it's a very desirable suburb of Minneapolis, St. Paul. Right now, those suburbs in Minneapolis, St. Paul are doing extraordinarily well. Some of the best performing kind of places to buy multifamily real estate in the country right now. But it's a tough time in the marketplace. There's not a lot of buyers. So normally these properties were just kind of out of reach for us. The cap rates were too low, just didn't make sense. This particular property, very complex deal. So we were able to bring a massive amount of value. It had an in-place HUD loan with a huge prepayment penalty. So it had to be, the buyer had to be a group that was willing to assume a HUD loan. That HUD loan was at 4.5% interest, had 32 years left on it. It had a $2.4 million overfunded construction escrow, like a replacement reserve escrow. So it had to be a group that was willing to buy that escrow. So that meant that they had to have a lot of extra cash and had to have a reason to use that. But then the owner is a nonprofit. They typically own and operate Section 42, Section 8 housing, HAP contract, different affordable deals of that nature. But they have a small number of market rate deals, and they were kind of operating this as an affordable property, even though there was no restrictions on it. And they needed someone who had deep pockets, but they really needed someone who also respected and honored their mission. And that's a tight Venn diagram. And I think we really fell into that Venn diagram. I came up with an idea where we basically offered an affordability covenant for 3 years. There's not an income restriction, but we are capping rents for 3 years. We made a commitment to them, kind of a handshake agreement. We wrote up like a 1-page document at closing, just saying like, we're going to do everything we can to work with your people. We're not going to come in and kick everybody out and renovate all the units or anything like that. We are explicitly not doing a deep value add on that particular property, doing everything we can to just kind of escalate people in place with, kind of our nominal, rent increases and stuff. With natural attrition, we are doing a light value add on those, but just doing everything we can to honor the mission of that organization. And then ultimately that manifested itself in getting a really good deal on the property. Also, it's being operated by a nonprofit. So those nonprofits, they typically have very low NOI. Just that's how nonprofits tend to operate. They don't generate a lot of profit. So we had to, as it stood at time of closing, they were running about a negative $400,000 cash flow burn on this asset. And they didn't really know why. They knew that they just weren't the right operator for that asset. And so we had to step into this asset. So we're assuming the loan, and with the in-place financials, there's almost $500,000 cash flow burn. But we knew we were going to be able to control expenses in a massive way. We were going to be able to ratchet down vacancy in a massive way, improve rent collections without needing to, jack up rents too much. So we got under contract in June 2024. Our HUD asset manager assigned to it literally got hit by a bus in the middle of our loan assumption process. And then we had this protracted contract period. And so operations started to deteriorate during our contract period, which is extremely common. And it deteriorated to the point that it got on the watch list with HUD. So it went into special servicing during our loan approval process, which they didn't tell us about that, because your lender doesn't tell the public when you're on the watch list. So there was like some weird back and forth where the loan assumption was stalled out. We didn't know why it took 9 months to assume that loan, but we closed on it here in mid-April, and it's been cash flow positive day one. And just the outpouring of love and support and gratitude from the tenants has been overwhelming. They see the turnaround in operations. Just things are running 10 times tighter than they were before. We're a profit-oriented business. We're very efficiency-oriented. So we're going to respond to those maintenance tickets as fast as we possibly can. If there's a water intrusion event, there's going to be an army of people there drying things out within an hour. Whereas previously it was taking like days to respond to these things, and tens of thousands of dollars damage is being done. So the tenants are they're so elated that we're there. The community is so elated that we're there. The local law enforcement and fire and EMS and stuff like that are so grateful that we're there. And then just to give you some sort of barometer here, we bought it at $180,000 a unit, and that's with that extremely favorable loan assumption. We paid 80 cents on the dollar to assume the escrow, so we made about $500,000 in cash at closing for assuming that escrow. And directly comparable assets nearby are transacting. There's actually a direct comp that transacted at $260 a unit, and we came in at $180 a unit on that deal. So I suspect that we paid $20.2 million, and I suspect it's probably worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $26 million today, 2 months later. So we're in really, really, really good, maybe one of the best deals we've ever done. And we're going to continue to honor our word to that operator. We're doing well. We don't need to run up the score, right? We are making more than enough money on this deal. We're going to be able to honor the mission of that group. And we actually have another property under contract with that group right now that we're going to close on in a couple months. They were so happy with how that deal played out that they came back and said, "Hey, would you like to buy some other assets? We feel like you're managing them better than we were managing them. You're honoring our mission. Seems like you're making money at it, so you're happy. And this allows us to focus on like our Section 8 properties and stuff that really we were built to serve.
Yeah. Well, that's an incredible deal. We appreciate you sharing that. We are running up on time though. So if you could just let me know where our best ever listeners could connect with you and learn more about your business and your investments.
Yeah. So anyone here can go to blackswanteam.com and they're welcome to book 15 minutes on my calendar. If there's anything I can do to bring you value, I'd love to chat. Happy to offer value if I can. We're currently putting all of our deals into the Secure Freedom Fund, where we pay a 10% fixed rate of return. So it's a preferred equity fund. It's a new money for new deals, and that's been an extremely successful fund so far. We've got a long wait list, but we've got lots of deals that are in our pipeline right now. So if that certainty is interesting to anybody on this listening to this podcast right now, anyone can go to securefreedomfund.com. You can book time on my calendar, check out all of our stuff there. But we'd love to serve your listeners any way we can, any way we can provide value. We'd be happy to do so.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for your time today. I know I learned a lot, and I hope our best ever listeners enjoyed it as much as I did.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Best ever listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to leave us a 5-star review and share this with someone who could value from it. Make sure you are following and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any. Thank you for listening. Have a best ever day.